Spanning 2 continents and covering over 2.7 million square kilometers, Kazakhstan stands as the world's 9th largest country and Central Asia's most influential nation. This is a land where ancient nomads first domesticated the horse, where the Silk Road carved paths through endless steppes, where Soviet nuclear tests reshaped the Earth itself, and where modern geopolitics play out on a grand scale.
From the thundering hooves of prehistoric horsemen to the launch pads of Baikonur Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan's story encompasses some of humanity's most pivotal moments. Yet despite its vast size and strategic importance, this landlocked giant remains one of the world's least understood nations. How did a collection of nomadic tribes evolve into a modern energy superpower? How did a people who lived by the rhythm of the seasons adapt to nuclear age realities? And how does a nation balance between Russian influence, Chinese investment, and Western partnerships while forging its own path forward? Today, we uncover the complete history of Kazakhstan, a tale of survival, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of independence across 5 millennia. Kazakhstan's story begins not with nations or borders, but with one of humanity's most revolutionary achievements. Around 5,500 years ago, in the windswept grasslands of northern Kazakhstan, something extraordinary happened that would change the course of human civilization forever. The bowtie culture is credited with the first domestication of horses, transforming these magnificent creatures from wild prey into mankind's greatest ally. Imagine the moment when the first humans successfully mounted a horse. This wasn't just about transportation, it was about power, speed, and the ability to traverse vast distances that had previously been impossible. The bowtie people didn't just tame horses, they revolutionized warfare, trade, and communication across the Eurasian steppes. Their archaeological sites reveal sophisticated settlements with hundreds of horse bones, evidence of a society built entirely around these remarkable animals. But the bowtie were just the beginning. As millennia passed, the steppes of Kazakhstan became a crossroads of civilizations, where the 4th and 3rd millennia witnessed the beginning of metal production, the manufacture of copper tools, and the use of casting molds. This wasn't some isolated backwater. This was a region at the cutting edge of Bronze Age technology. The vast grasslands attracted wave after wave of nomadic peoples, each leaving their mark on the landscape and culture. The Scythians arrived around the 1st millennium BCE, bringing with them elaborate burial practices and stunning gold work that would later astound archaeologists. Their kurgans, massive burial mounds, still dot the Kazakh landscape today, silent witnesses to a civilization that mastered the art of living on horseback. Then came the Turkic peoples, introducing new languages, customs, and technologies. But none of these earlier conquests could prepare the region for what was about to unfold in the 13th century. The year was 1218, and a storm was brewing on the eastern horizon. Mongol Tatar hordes led by Genghis Khan invaded Kazakhstan. They swept over the Kazakh land with fire and sword. This wasn't just another nomadic migration. This was the arrival of history's largest contiguous empire, and Kazakhstan found itself at its very heart. In 1206, Genghis Khan and the Mongols conquered the area, ruling it until 1368. For over 160 years, Kazakhstan existed within the Mongol Empire, experiencing both the devastation of conquest and the benefits of being part of a vast trade network that connected Europe to Asia. Cities were rebuilt, trade routes flourished, and the genetic and cultural mixing that occurred during this period would profoundly shape the future Kazakh identity. But empires rise and fall, and as Mongol power waned, something remarkable began to happen on the Kazakh steppes. Local leaders started asserting their independence, tribal alliances shifted, and gradually, a new identity began to emerge from the ashes of the old empire. The pivotal moment came in 1465 when the Kazakh people came together under the leadership of Janibek Khan and Kari Khan, exerting control over what is now Kazakhstan, calling themselves the Kazakh Khanate. This wasn't just a political union, it was the birth of the Kazakh nation as we know it today. Picture the scene. 2 ambitious leaders, Janibek and Kari, breaking away from the Uzbek Khan's authority and establishing their own realm. They called themselves Kazakh, meaning free or wanderer, a name that perfectly captured their spirit of independence. The Kazakh Khanate wasn't built on cities or fortresses. It was built on mobility, on the ancient nomadic traditions that had sustained life on the steppes for millennia. During the late 15th century and throughout the 16th century, the Kazakhs were able to consolidate a nomadic empire stretching across the steppes east of the Caspian Sea and north of the Aral Sea as far as the upper Irtysh River and the western approaches to the Altai Mountains. This was an empire unlike any other, fluid, adaptable, and perfectly suited to the vast grasslands it controlled. The Khanate organized itself into three great tribal confederations called Juz: the Great Juz in the south and southeast, the Middle Juz in the north and northeast, and the Little Juz in the west. Each Juz had its own territories, leaders, and customs, but all recognized themselves as part of the greater Kazakh nation. This system provided both unity and flexibility, allowing the Kazakhs to present a united front against external threats while maintaining their traditional tribal structures. For centuries, the Kazakhs successfully defended their independence against numerous enemies. They fought off incursions from the Uzbeks to the south, resisted pressure from Chinese dynasties to the east, and held their ground against various Russian expansions from the north. Their mobile lifestyle and superior horsemanship made them formidable opponents in the open steppe warfare that characterized conflicts in this region. But their greatest test came in the form of the Dzungar Khanate, a powerful Mongol confederation that emerged in the 17th century. The Dzungar-Kazakh wars would rage for decades, with the survival of the Kazakh people hanging in the balance. Under the leadership of Abulkair Khan, the Kazakhs won major victories over the Dzungar at the Bulanti River in 1726 and at the Battle of Anyurakai in 1729. These victories weren't just military triumphs, they were defining moments in Kazakh history. Ablai Khan participated in the most significant battles against the Dzungar from the 1720s to the 1750s, emerging as one of Kazakhstan's greatest national heroes. The Dzungar Wars united the Kazakh people as never before, forging a shared identity through struggle and victory. However, the cost of constant warfare was enormous. The Kazakh population was decimated, their traditional grazing lands were devastated, and their political structure was weakened. It was in this moment of vulnerability that a new power began to assert its influence over the Kazakh steppes: the Russian Empire. The Russians didn't arrive as conquerors, at least not initially. They came as protectors, offering security to Kazakh leaders who were exhausted by decades of warfare. In the 1730s, Khan Abulkair of the Little Juz made a fateful decision that would alter Kazakh history forever. He accepted Russian protection in exchange for nominal allegiance to the Russian crown. What began as a protective alliance gradually transformed into something far more controlling. Russian settlements appeared along Kazakh borders, Cossack troops established fortified lines across traditional grazing routes, and Russian officials began interfering in Kazakh internal affairs. The other Juz initially maintained their independence, but one by one, they too were drawn into the Russian sphere of influence. The traditional Kazakh way of life, based on nomadic herding and tribal autonomy, was incompatible with the Russian Empire's vision of centralized control and settled agriculture. The Kazakh Khanate lasted until 1847, when the last vestiges of independent Kazakh political authority were finally eliminated. The transformation that followed was nothing short of revolutionary. Russian administrators divided Kazakhstan into provinces, imposed new legal systems, and encouraged Slavic colonization of the fertile northern regions. Railroads cut across the steppes, cities grew where none had existed before, and traditional nomadic routes were blocked by farms and settlements. Many Kazakhs resisted these changes. Periodic uprisings erupted throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, the most significant occurring in 1916 when starving Kazakhs revolt against Russian Czar. This rebellion, triggered by attempts to conscript Kazakhs for World War I labor battalions, resulted in brutal suppression and the flight of hundreds of thousands of Kazakhs to China and other neighboring regions. But even as traditional Kazakh society was being transformed, a new consciousness was emerging. Educated Kazakhs began writing in their own language, establishing newspapers, and articulating visions of Kazakh national identity that could survive within the modern world. When the Russian Revolution erupted in 1917, Kazakh nationalists set up independent state, but surrendered to Bolsheviks 2 years later. The Bolshevik victory brought both hope and terror to Kazakhstan. On one hand, the communists promised equality for all nationalities and an end to colonial exploitation. On the other hand, their radical social and economic policies would prove devastating for traditional Kazakh society. In 1925, Kazakh Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic formed, with Almaty as its capital. For the first time since 1847, Kazakhstan had some form of official recognition as a distinct political entity, even if it remained firmly under Moscow's control. The 1930s brought unimaginable horror to Kazakhstan. Stalin's collectivization campaign forced nomadic Kazakhs to abandon their traditional lifestyle and settle on collective farms. Those who resisted were labeled enemies of the people and faced deportation or death. The result was catastrophic, a man-made famine that killed between 1.3 and 1.7 million Kazakhs, roughly 38% of the total population. This period, known in Kazakh as the Ashashilik, or Great Hunger, represents one of history's most devastating genocides. Entire regions were depopulated, traditional knowledge was lost, and the Kazakh language and culture came perilously close to extinction. Yet somehow, the Kazakh people survived, their cultural identity battered but not broken. World War II brought new challenges and opportunities. Kazakhstan became a crucial rear base for the Soviet war effort, hosting evacuated factories and serving as a training ground for military units. The war also accelerated industrialization, as massive mining and metallurgical complexes were established to feed the Soviet military machine. The post-war period saw Kazakhstan transform into one of the Soviet Union's most important republics. The Virgin Lands campaign of the 1950s brought millions of settlers, mostly Slavic, to cultivate Kazakhstan's northern steppes. Massive infrastructure projects, including the world's first space center at Baikonur, made Kazakhstan synonymous with Soviet technological achievement. But Kazakhstan also became the epicenter of one of the most frightening aspects of the Cold War: nuclear testing. Between 1949 and 1989, the Soviet Union conducted 456 nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk test site, exposing hundreds of thousands of Kazakhs to radiation and creating environmental damage that persists to this day. Throughout this period, a young Kazakh named Nursultan Nazarbayev was rising through the Communist Party ranks. Born in 1940 in a small village, Nazarbayev represented a new generation of Kazakhs who had grown up entirely within the Soviet system, yet retained a strong sense of Kazakh identity. As the 1980s progressed, and Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms began to weaken Central Soviet control, Nazarbayev found himself in an increasingly powerful position. On 25 March 1990, Kazakhstan held its first elections with Nursultan Nazarbayev, the chairman of the Supreme Soviet, elected as its first president. Nazarbayev faced an impossible balancing act. Unlike the leaders of the other Soviet republics, Nazarbayev remained committed to the Soviet Union during the spring and summer of 1991, largely because he considered parts of USSR too interdependent economically. He understood that Kazakhstan's economy was deeply integrated with the Soviet system and worried about the consequences of sudden independence. But history had other plans. Following the August 1991 abortive coup attempt in Moscow and the subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan declared independence on December 16, 1991. Remarkably, Kazakhstan, formerly a constituent republic of the USSR, declared independence on December 16, 1991, making it the last Soviet republic to do so. In December of that year, Kazakhstan declared full independence from the Soviet Union and, led by Nazarbayev, helped form the Commonwealth of Independent States, an economic union of former Soviet republics. Nazarbayev's cautious approach paid dividends. Kazakhstan avoided the chaos and conflict that plagued many other post-Soviet states. the newly independent Kazakhstan faced enormous challenges. The economy was in shambles, ethnic tensions were rising between Kazakhs and the large Russian minority, and the country lacked the institutions necessary for democratic governance. But Kazakhstan also possessed tremendous advantages: vast mineral wealth, a relatively educated population, and in Nazarbayev, a leader with both international credibility and domestic support. The years following independence have been marked by significant reforms to the Soviet command economy and political monopoly on power. Nazarbayev moved quickly to establish Kazakhstan as a reliable partner for Western investors, while maintaining good relations with Russia and China. He attracted billions in foreign investment, particularly in the oil and gas sectors, and oversaw the construction of new pipelines that gave Kazakhstan direct access to world markets. Nazarbayev's rule lasted nearly 3 decades, making him one of the world's longest-serving leaders. His tenure was marked by significant economic growth, political stability, and the gradual revival of Kazakh culture and language. He moved the capital from Almaty to a purpose-built city in the northern steppes, first called Akmola, then Astana, and finally Nur-Sultan in his honor. Until recently, he was the junior partner in Kazakhstan's ruling tandem, in which the leader was his predecessor, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who ruled the country from its independence for nearly 30 years. This changed in 2019 when Nazarbayev unexpectedly resigned, handing power to his chosen successor, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Today's Kazakhstan bears little resemblance to the nomadic society that existed just over a century ago, yet threads of continuity remain. The Kazakh language, once nearly extinct, is experiencing a revival. Traditional music, literature, and customs are being rediscovered and celebrated. The three juz system, while no longer politically relevant, still influences social relationships and cultural identity. Kazakhstan has emerged as Central Asia's dominant power and one of the world's major energy exporters. Its strategic location between Europe and Asia, combined with its vast mineral wealth, ensures its continued importance on the global stage. The country has successfully navigated between major powers, Russia, China, and the United States, maintaining independence while benefiting from relationships with all three. From the first horsemen of the bowtie culture to the modern skyscrapers of Almaty and Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan's journey spans over 5 millennia of human history. It's a story of adaptation and survival, of a people who learned to thrive in one of the world's most challenging environments. The Kazakhs, who once thundered across the steppes on horseback, now lead a modern nation-state. But they remain, as their name suggests, forever free, masters of their own destiny in the heart of Eurasia. The story of Kazakhstan reminds us that nations are not just political constructs. They are the living embodiment of human endurance, creativity, and the eternal desire for freedom. In the vastness of the Kazakh steppes, we see reflected the endless possibilities of human civilization itself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.